This week I'm going to be making Taylor Swift's Grammy 2025 outfit. She's got the chain part on her thigh and everyone was like, what if he's written mine on my upper thigh? It stands for Travis. The T. I thought that stood for Taylor. But when everyone decided that it stood for Travis, I was like, I'm not having a T on mine if it stands for Travis. I'd have a T if it stood for Taylor. These are the materials I've got. This one, I don't even know what this is called. It's like sequin fabric, but not this. Chiffon. And then for the bodice part, I'm gonna use zip ties for the boning, which is the same thing I did for the Evermore dress. But I've got this. This is just a cotton fabric. But anyway, let's start before I just start talking too much. I started this dress by taping up my dress form, just taping on the mannequin to see where I wanted my style lines to be. This is pretty much the easiest part. You just look at the reference, see where the seams are, put some tape where you think those seams are, and then pin your mock-up fabric on top, and then you should be able to see those lines that you just taped down through the fabric, and then you can just draw it, and then that's your pattern. That's pretty much how easy it is to dance. I then took this over to my table to draw out these lines with a ruler just to make them a bit neater, and also so I could add seam allowance to all of my pattern pieces. I tend to add 2 centimeters seam allowance just because you can always cut it down later and it makes life a lot easier when you're trying to sew this. I then cut all my pieces out. I use these pieces to make a mock-up out of the fabric just so I could see what it was looking like, if I needed to make any changes. I have made my first mock-up. I haven't tried it on at all or anything yet. Does that fit perfectly? It seems like it fits perfectly. Just these back panels, they'll have to be a little bit longer. So I'm doing another mock-up and I was like, I'm doing so well. Like I just sewed everything together and I made a pattern for the whole thing as well. And when I was making it, this back panel is extremely long. I had to extend it that much because it was short in my first mock-up, so I extended everything. And then I sewed it all together and I put it on my dress form, on my dress mannequin, and this part here is supposed to be there. I sewed them on backwards. Time to undo it, which isn't that bad actually. It's 12:43. I have made the top and I put the boning in. This one in the middle I drew because it kind of looks like there was one in the middle, but I just felt that putting one in the middle was a little bit weird, so I didn't. After making my first mock-up and it looking good, I then draped my real fabric, my actual fabric, on top of this mock-up just so I could see how the front was supposed to look before I then went and made everything else. The draping of my bodice, actually all of the draping of this whole thing was really difficult. This was my first time doing any draping like this. There was a lot of draping and this fabric did not want to drape. No matter how many times I tried to drape it, it just wouldn't sit right. I ended up going with just as close as I could get it because it did not want to sit like hers was. I think hers was more of like a chiffon fabric. Mine was not. My fabric was quite stiff. This is what I've done so far. I've got one little ruffle thing that goes there, another one here, which it just wants to sit out. But I'm thinking the only way I can fix that is if I start cutting this off because it's just pulling it weird. It's kind of looking right because if I look at the photo of it, this edge, she's got 1, she's got 2, and then she's got 3. Oh, 1, 2, 3. And then this one back up. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get mine to pull back up like that. Let's see. I then cut any excess off of my front bodice piece and then basted all my seams in place. I ended up leaving the strap part to do later, so I just left a chunk of material there just because I couldn't be bothered to do it right then. I then basted all of these seams in place, making sure I didn't accidentally stitch it to my mock-up because that would be very annoying. I'd have to then either cut my basting stitches or cut my mock-up to try and get it off. This did actually end up happening. So I'm going to start taking all of these ones out now. That's what I was a bit concerned about, was I have actually just sewn it to the material. Just right here though. There we go. We have it off. So now if I put it back on, question is, will it just go back on? And it seems like it. Yay! It stays. The iron smells like it's burning. This is my second layer, which is the one that I've interfaced, which took a while. The interfacing did not want to stick on. Here's the first one I did. Cute. That's the first layer. And then the second layer I put the interfacing in it. I have a feeling the interfacing is too stiff. I don't know. Is it weird? Or is it just me? Maybe it's just me. Maybe when I put the boning in it, it might fix it. I don't know. I'm just gonna keep going and hope it works. Here we have all my pieces. It's not gonna stay in shape because it's literally just the top layer. I then sewed my front bodice piece to my side panel and my back panels. I just altered the side panels slightly just because my front panel of the actual material was quite wider than my bodice lining piece. I then cut all of my seams just to make them a bit smaller, so then when I add the boning in, nothing gets caught on the seams. So it's all ironed now. It was my birthday the other day and I got an iron and an ironing board. You can't see it though because it's not in frame. Look how cute. So exciting. Now I need to do this. I then worked on doing the sleeve, which actually took quite a lot of thought, and I wish I did it when I was doing my front bodice piece because it didn't exactly turn out how I wanted it to. That's alright. I did also make sure to make it a little bit bigger so then it wasn't resting fully on my shoulder. I wanted it to kind of fall off because I noticed that's what hers did a lot. If you saw any videos of her dancing around, it tended to fall off of her shoulder. I then used my mock-up to draw out where all of my boning channels were going to be because I had already planned them out all on my mock-up piece, so I just used that to redraw them onto my final bodice. And then after doing that, I pinned my two lining layers and my outer layer together just at the top so then I could stitch along that and then flip this inside out. I did again also trim down all of my seams. It just made it a lot easier to flip it inside out, and also make sure to slice all of your curves. It'll just make it lay nice and flat. I then turned this inside out and I did accidentally sew my strap to the inside, which I wasn't supposed to do, so I did just go back and fix that. I'm currently sewing my boning channels. I have top stitched just these two layers, just these two, all the way across, and that just sits on top of it like that. But I'm doing my boning channels, which is kind of difficult when it gets to one of these parts because you've got to like bunch all the fabric up and like try and sew it like that without sewing this top part, which is kind of difficult. I've just put all my boning in. I do need to tack this down or something. It just wants to sit up. So I'm gonna undo all of this and hope that maybe it'll just sit down there. The inside's really neat, so that's good. I then hand stitched some of my, what do you even call them? My little ruffle things, my draping bits into place just because they wanted to sit in weird places. I unpicked all of my basting stitches for the bodice. It's actually looking pretty good. I'm gonna cut this weird bit off the top and then I'm going to get it to the right size and then I'm gonna try and melt the edges, I guess, then it's not sharp. Next thing I did was cut down all of my zip ties because that's what I'm using for boning. It's a lot cheaper and easier. I wouldn't actually know if it's easier. I've never used real boning. I would recommend doing this outside as well because you're melting plastic. When I did the other ends of them, I did take it outside to do it. I'm trying to drape this and basically there's this pleat here. It looks like it's one just full piece of material and there's this pleat on this side here and then there's another pleat a little bit further along that side, which then a bunch of fabric comes out from under it and scoops up, and then on the other side it all just goes up. I think I've got this. This is what I've sort of done for the front. It sort of doesn't, hers is a lot more gathered up. I then started draping my skirt, which this took me so long. I probably did it 5 times, maybe more than that. I draped this thing so many times. It just didn't want to sit right, and I did say that before, but my fabric was a lot stiffer than what hers looked like, so I just got it as close as I could, which was fine for me. So I think this is actually the closest I'm gonna get it. Ignoring all the bulk, that is in the hips. I'm hoping that will go, especially this hip. There's a lot under there. That is the general idea. And then I'm hoping when I cut this all here back, it'll sit right. I then started chopping away at my fabric, just hoping that it was gonna sit right. I had no idea if I was cutting it the right length or I could have been cutting it too short. I was just hoping. But I mean, it turned out well. You wouldn't be seeing this video if it didn't turn out well, so it's a good sign. I've got the whole skirt basted in place. There's a lot of excess stuff, but now I'm gonna flip it inside out and just deal with the inside. I'm so confused. Just trying to deal with this mess of a skirt. It's really difficult. I'll see when it's looking a bit better. I then put 2 basting stitches into my chiffon skirt just so I could ruffle it up so I didn't have to make a pattern for this. I just did a big long rectangle, some basting stitches, ruffled it and called it a day. That was my lining fabric. I did need a lining fabric for this dress as well because my outer fabric was really see-through and I didn't exactly want it to be see-through, so I had to add a lining layer. I did also baste my 3 layers together, so I basted my 2 skirt layers to my bodice before I went and stitched them together with the sewing machine just to make sure I was stitching them where I wanted them to be. I then added my zipper in, just pinning it in place, and I only pinned it to my outer lining layer and my out layer. I don't know if that makes any sense, I hope it does, but I just pinned it to those ones and sewed it, and then with my innermost lining layer I just hand stitched that to it so then I could fully encase my seam and my zip into the bodice, then you couldn't see it and it looked nice and neat and really pretty. And this is actually the nicest I've ever made something look on the inside, which I'm really proud of. I also did a lot of hand stitching in this. I've never really hand stitched anything before. This was a lot of learning done, but I think it turned out really well. Look at the difference between these 2 sides. That's the side that I just hand stitched down. So now all of this is in there. I then hemmed my outer layer, my outer skirt, just in the weird little circle, semicircle shape that hers is. I don't really know what you call it. It just goes up at one side. At both sides actually, it goes up on one leg, so you gotta hem it weird. And then I just trimmed off any excess I had from the seams, and I would have done a rolled hem if I could be bothered, but I couldn't, so I didn't. And then if you accidentally cut a hole in your skirt, make sure to stitch it back up, because I somehow managed to cut a hole right in the front. I went to the shops yesterday and I got bias binding just to finish these edges, because the top part of this dress is really good, like the whole bodice is really good. The skirt is average. The skirt is there. Next thing we want to do is pin the lining layer, then we can hem it. And while we're hemming it, I'm going to talk about books, because throughout this whole entire video, I had to cut out an hour of me just talking about books. I'm currently reading Throne of Glass and it's just amazing. I have no other words than it's just amazing. I'm actually currently reading Queen of Shadows, which I'm not that far into it. It's really good though. My favorite book so far is The Assassin's Blade. I read it third, so anyone saying that reading it third is worse than reading it first? I don't think so. I think if I read it first, I wouldn't have continued reading the series. I would have been too sad. Next thing I did was pin and sew on my bias binding, and I added bias binding just so I could hide this middle seam, the seam that is in between the skirt and the bodice, just because it was kind of itchy because the outer fabric is itchy. Also, it's polyester. I'm allergic to polyester and I was getting rashes, so I just cut this seam down and then hid it in some bias binding, which made it look really nice and neat on the inside as well. I did have to hand stitch this on as well, because otherwise you would have been able to see a seam on the outside, which isn't what I wanted. And also there was boning where I was stitching it, so I just had to make sure I didn't do this with a machine, otherwise I probably would have broken many needles. The next thing I did was just stitch up the split in the leg, just because every time I walk it wanted to open up. This is my letter I'm going to be using. It's an A, it's not a T. My name does start with an A, so I guess it works. Could also be for Azriel because, you know, love Azriel. Now we get to do fun things because we've finally finished the dress. We're now making the thigh thing, whatever you want to call it, the letter on the thigh, the necklace thigh charm thing. This was actually a lot harder than it should have been, and it took me around 2 hours to make because my beads had like the hole in the middle and I couldn't just attach them to my chain. I had to get a bit of wire, attach this to the chain, then put the bead bead through it and then attach this to another little bit of chain. And I had to do this, I don't even know how many times. I did 9 twice, that's 18. I did this 21 times, which is a lot of times. And then I got my elastic and I just stitched this into a circle. There's a circle. And then I just hand stitched my chains to the elastic so then it would hang down. And I made sure my A was facing forward so then it would be facing the correct way when I wore it. But for some reason when I was wearing it, it just wanted to twist around. I'm hoping that green stripe is just the lighting in here and not my actual camera. Today I'm painting shoes. I have these shoes. Her shoes are red. I had these beige, is that beige? I had these tan, I don't know. I had these shoes. I got them years ago from a secondhand store. They were very much falling apart. I wore them once. They're a size 7, which is too small for me or anyone in my family actually. They're the exact style of her shoe, or pretty much. Hers probably way better than my shoes, but just used them because they work. Just need a little bit of paint. But anyway, here's the reveal.